Hey, welcome back to Love Wins, where the truth matters because it's the truth that sets us free. All right, we are in part two, which some of you may feel like is part one or should have been part one. I purposely started the way I started because I wanted you to see the humanity of Jesus in chapter one. Part one. I wanted you to see that when he went home to his own people, that they tried to kill him, because I wanted you to see the seriousness of the clash between what they had expected as their Messiah and who Jesus actually was. That they were so infuriated by and disappointed with Jesus that his own townspeople tried to kill him. The reason I started there is because it's easy to say, I believe in Jesus. It's easy to say, I'm following Jesus. It's easy to say the phrase that has come to mark my own preaching, Jesus is enough. But who is he? Who is he? Because if you had asked a Jew in first century time, do you believe in the Messiah? They would say absolutely. If you had asked a Samaritan, do you believe in the Messiah? Absolutely. But when the Messiah came, they didn't want him. In fact, they tried to kill him. Why is that? Because their ideas about who the Messiah would be, should be, was nothing like what he was. Now here we are 2,000 years removed from that time, and it's as easy for us, maybe more easy for us, to assume that we know who he was without actually spending the time to find out who he was. So today, we are going to go back to the very beginning. In fact, we're going to go back pre-beginning. You say, what do you mean by that? We're going to go back to Matthew chapter 1 before Jesus is born, because the first thing Matthew introduces us to is his genealogy. Now, some of you are already rolling your eyes, maybe not literally, but in your head, you're like, oh no. And when you start reading Matthew 1, if you're like me, you skip it. You're like, I don't need to read this. So when do we get back to the actual story? But by doing that, we're missing something, and it's big. Matthew was a tax collector, which means a Jewish tax collector, which means he's hated by his own people because he's taking money from their pockets and giving it to the evil Roman Empire. But he's not a Roman, he's just a Jew. So the Romans don't want him. He's just a tool in their hands to get what they need and want. The Jews hate him. He's a man in the middle with no people, no friends, no nothing. That's why it described Jesus as eating with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. Like, tax collectors were the lowest of the low. They didn't count. And Jesus called Matthew to be one of his disciples, which would have put him automatically at the bottom of the rank amongst the 12 that Jesus called. And it would have shocked Matthew that he was even extended the invitation, because I don't count. I'm a hindrance to you. Like, you shouldn't even, if I was advising you as your advisor, Jesus, I would not advise you to put me in the group. I shouldn't be there. So when Matthew tells the story of Jesus, I call the book of Matthew the book of the unexpected, because it's unexpected that Matthew's there to begin with, and then Matthew systematically carries us through all of these things about Jesus that you just wouldn't expect. And he starts with the genealogy. You say, well, what's unexpected about it? You don't have to read very far before you get to information that doesn't exist in any other genealogy in the Bible. So I'm taking my Bible, Minister's Bible, just because it has some stuff at the back that's irrelevant for you. Bible's still the same. So Matthew chapter 1, and when you begin reading, it sounds really boring. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So automatically, right off the bat, you need to understand that when the Bible says that someone's the son of someone, it does not mean one generation necessarily. It just means in the line of. So Jesus is from the line of David, from the line of Abraham. That's how we would say it. Abraham begot, there's that good old English word, Isaac. Isaac begot Jacob. Jacob begot Judah and his brothers. Boring, right? And for many years, I just skipped and started down in verse 18. But the very next verse, verse 3 says, Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Two things in this verse don't make any sense. They're unexpected. First of all, a woman is mentioned. That has never happened in any genealogy ever in Scripture, and there's lots of them. And second, two brothers are mentioned, even though only one carries on to the next begot. Why? Well, we're not going to touch on that today. We're going to focus on why was Tamar mentioned. If you go to verse 4, it says, Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. Nahshon begot Salmon. Again, begot, normal. Nothing here that jumps out. But then verse 5 says, Salmon begot Boaz by Rahab, another woman. Boaz begot Obed by Ruth, another woman. And Obed begot Jesse, and Jesse begot David the king. So between Abraham and David, three women are mentioned. That has never happened before, and yet bang, 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 here it is. I don't know if we're going to be able to put together any graphics to explain this, but it's beautiful in my head. And if you've watched the movie Horton, Hears a Who, you'll get it more. So I believe in that movie there's like an elephant and he's carrying like a dandelion or some such flower in his trunk. And inside the head of the flower is a whole other world. And the movie that follows is taking place inside this flower that's being held by this elephant. In other words, in this seemingly small, insignificant nothing, the head of the flower is a whole world. I also illustrate this sometimes by the forest and the trees. It's like we can either focus on trees, individual trees, or we can back up and see the forest. But in this metaphor, first you see a forest, and then you can zone in on one tree within that forest. But then actually within that tree is another whole forest. And then you can zone in on a tree in that forest, and then there's another whole forest. You see where I'm going? So you're listing names, and you can read them very quickly. But every person who's named has a story. So the forest in chapter 1 is this genealogy. The trees are each person in the genealogy. But each person has their own story, another forest. And within that forest are other characters and other events. And as you drill down, it doesn't get less, it gets more. So when it says that Judah begot Perez and Zerah by Tamar, that's easy to say and it's easy to pass by. And if you don't know the story, you're like, okay, whatever. But those two trees, Judah and Tamar, inside those two names is a whole forest. And it's a messy forest. So I'm going to do for you something that I don't often do. I'm going to read you the story. And unfortunately, we don't have time to break down all of it. I will try and comment here and there just so you don't get completely turned off or get the wrong idea about what's happening. It's a crazy story. So it's in Genesis 38. So if you have a Bible that you keep notes in, I would write Genesis 38 beside Matthew chapter 1, verse 3, so that you know that the forest that belongs to that tree Tamar is in Genesis 38. And you can go back and you can read through that forest story. And then there's other trees in that story, and you can just keep branching out. So background. And I'm excited about this. Like, I've been looking forward to recording this since last week. At this point, Judah is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. So you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. Jacob was the one who embraced God and his promises and the covenant, and God blessed him. And he had these 12 sons by 4 women, which is another whole forest that we're not going to get into. And then amongst those 12 boys, there was Joseph. And Joseph was the favorite son at that point in time because he was born to Rachel, who was the only woman that Jacob really loved. And the other boys hated him for it. And then on top of this, Joseph had these dreams, and in these dreams it was implied that the other brothers were going to worship him, even his parents were going to worship him, and that just blew their minds even more and made them hate him even more. And one day they saw their opportunity when they were far, far from home, and Joseph had come to bring them food and supplies and check on them because he didn't have to work. He was the favorite son. They decided they're going to kill him. Well, fast forward, they didn't kill him. They ended up selling him to traders that were passing by, who were also their relatives, another forest. And he was taken to Egypt. But they went home with a bloody, torn up coat of many colors, this special coat that he had to signify that he was the favorite son, ripped and torn and dipped in blood, dried, and gave it to their father and said, "We found this coat on the way home. Joseph was nowhere to be found. We think he's dead." Jacob was absolutely devastated. And Judah, who very much took part in getting rid of Joseph, couldn't handle it. So he left home. And chapter 38 is the story within the story. So chapter 37 is about all the brothers and home and what's going on there and the dynamics there. And then chapter 39 jumps back to that whole dynamic of Joseph and Egypt and all what's going on there. And in between all of that is this chapter 38, which is a snapshot of Judah's life away from home. Lots of forests, lots of trees. Keep following. So we're gonna zoom in now on this forest that involves Judah and Tamar. It came to pass at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. Foreigners, not God's people. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite. Canaanite, not God's people. Whose name was Shua. And he married her. And he went into her. So now he is not only left home and become friends with a foreigner, now he's married a Canaanite. Like, this guy's life is spiraling down. Which often happens. We can make one bad decision in life, and the guilt and shame and regret from that can send us into a spiral of alcoholism, of drug addiction, of sex addiction. Who knows what it can do? Or all of those things, or more of those things. So his wife conceived and bore a son, and he named him Follow this. She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Very unusual. Men name the children, especially the sons. 3. She conceived yet again and bore a son, and called his name Shelah. He was at Kezib when she bore him. So the first son, he's there, he names him. Second son, he doesn't name him. Third son, he's not even present. So now his life continues to spiral. It's amazing to me how the Bible can say a whole lot in very few words. Then Judah, so time is passing, took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. So this Tamar is the wife of his son But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. Now, I do have to qualify this one. At this point in the experience of the Bible and the cultures of the Bible, and especially this culture, they don't have a concept of Satan. They attribute everything to God. So if something good happens, it's because God did it. If something bad happened, God did it. So when it says that God killed that's their understanding of it. He died too young, unexplainably. Could have been an aneurysm, could have been who knows what. God did it. When I lived in Cape Breton, they had these two expressions. If something was going good, they'd say, oh, you must be living right. If something was going bad, you say, oh, you must not be living right. We come up with these things to explain the good and the bad of life. And in their mind, they believed in this all powerful, our God is one. He's in control of everything. So if something good happens, he did it. If something bad happens, he did it. So that's why it says God killed him. Verse 9. Verse 8. So Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and marry her and raise up heir to your brother. Now, this is a cultural thing. God never gave instructions to live this way, but this is how the culture did it. If a woman married into a family, she was essentially bought by the family from her family. So, in essence, it was seen that if a father had a daughter, he owned her. When she got married, he sold her. And now this other family owns her. And also, the lineage of especially the firstborn was very important. So if he died prematurely, as is the case here, it was the responsibility of the brother, because she belongs to the family, his wife, to take her as his wife. Even if he has another wife, he takes her in. And he is to have her bear children for his brother. In other words, even though technically, scientifically, and biologically it would be Onan's children, from the community perspective, they would be seen as Er's children because that's Er's wife. Well, Onan didn't want to do this. So he died, and the interpretation of that by the community, just like is, well, he wasn't doing what he was supposed to do, so God killed him too. Then, verse 11, Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till my son Shelah is grown. So we still own you, and I will give you my youngest son Shelah as a husband, but he's too young right now. So go home, live there as a widow, grieve, take whatever time. When Shelah is older, you can come back and marry him, and things will carry on. So Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. Verse 12. Now in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. So time keeps marching forward. And Judah was comforted, and he went up to his sheep shearers at Timnah, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, look, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she took off her widow's garments, covered herself with a veil, wrapped herself, and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. For she saw, understood, perceived, that Shelah was grown, and she was not given to him as a wife. So enough time has passed now that she should have been married to Shelah and carrying on with life, but that never happened. And she could perceive it's never going to happen. When Judah saw her, so she dresses as a prostitute and waits on the road between his home and where he's going to shear his sheep. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, because that's what she was presenting herself as, because she had covered her face. He then turned in to her by the way and said, please let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, what will you give me that you may come in to me? Now, you may be horrified at this point, going, what is Judah, a child of Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, doing hiring a prostitute? Because his life is out of control. He is not a good church-going boy at this point by any stretch of the wildest imagination. But God is still working in his life. God still loves him, and God is still in pursuit of him. It's called grace. Where are we? Verse 16. He turned to her by the way, and he said, "Please let me come in to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" And he said, "I will send a young goat from the flock." And she said, "What will you give me as a pledge until you send it?" And he said, "What pledge should I give you?" And she said, "Your signet cord, sorry, your signet and cord, and your staff that is in your hand." This is basically, give me your ID, and I'll hold your ID until you come back and make payment. Then he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. So Tamar is now pregnant by her father-in-law. So she arose and went away and laid aside her veil and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah sent the young goat by the hand of his friend the Adullamite to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he did not find her. So he sends his friend to go take the goat, make payment, get his ID back. Couldn't find her. He asked the men of that place, saying, "Where is the harlot who was openly by the roadside?" And they said, "There is no harlot in this place." So he returned to Judah and said, "I cannot find her." Also the men of the place said, "There is no harlot in that place." And Judah said, "Let her take them for herself. She can keep my ID, lest we be shamed, for I sent this young goat, and you have not found her." It came to pass. It always comes to pass. Time has a way of working things out. About 3 months later, that Judah was told, saying, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry." So Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong, I am with child." And she said, "Please determine whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." And Judah acknowledged them. Good on him. And said, "She has been more righteous than I." We could spend a whole long time in that forest. "Because I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he never knew her, never slept with her again. That's a crazy story. It's too crazy to not be true. It's a story that if it happened in your family, you wouldn't talk about it. You wouldn't want people to know that. But when Jesus has Matthew introduce him to the world, he's like, "I want you to write down my story so people know who I am. And I want you to start with Abraham. And I want people to know that I'm a child of Abraham, because I want people to know that when Abraham was promised a seed, and that seed would bless all the nations, I want them to know I am that seed. So I want you to trace from Abraham, and I want you to trace all the way down through. But I want you to make some stops along the way. The first stop I want you to make is I want you to tell them about Tamar. Tamar, are you sure that you want them to know about Tamar? You want them to know that you came from a encounter between Judah and his daughter-in-law where he thought it was okay because she was supposedly a hooker? You want us to know. You want us to remember. You want that story to be written down and recorded, and you want it highlighted in your family tree, so that whenever anyone reads your family tree to check out if you are who you say you are, that they come across Tamar. And they're going to notice because no other woman has ever been mentioned before. She's the first woman ever mentioned in the genealogy anywhere ever in the Bible. And you want that? You want me to write that down? He had to ask Matthew to do it because nobody else would have done it. Because Matthew knew what it was like to be a Tamar, to be on the outside, to not be one of the people that counted, to be one of the people that nobody wants to know or talk about or acknowledge. What's your son do? What's Matthew doing these days? I heard he was in school. He must have graduated by now. What's he up to? No, we don't talk about that. I'm not telling you that my son's a tax collector. In fact, I don't even acknowledge him as my son. Matthew, who's that? We have a way of cutting people out when they don't fit our story. Jesus has a way of grafting those people back into the story. So in episode 1 of Who is Jesus and what is he like, as we begin at the beginning of the story, you need to understand that Jesus includes everyone because he was the seed sent to bless all the nations. We'll see you next time.